So today our topic is primarily going to be centered on filtering. What I want to show you is a few things here. Right now you can see we've got a trip created here on the screen. This is a bucket list trip. It essentially starts from, where are we starting this thing from? Outer Banks in North Carolina all the way out to North Dakota, South Dakota. But in this case, I'm looking at this trip and I'm wanting to continue building out and build this trip out. So in this case, I'm thinking here, I want to come down from South Dakota. I want to come down here into Denver, right? So one of the common questions we see or common scenarios people ask about is they'll look at this trip and they'll say, okay, great. And as we've kind of demonstrated before, when I want to find a location, I want to sort of zoom in where the end of my driving radius appears. We've talked about it before, and we can touch over it again if we need to. But essentially, the driving radius is my decision, my settings about how far or how long I want to drive. So I've already set those. So I can see that if I'm headed down to Denver here, this is going to take me down 25. And as I zoom in, what I want you to notice here is you see all these little green tents. And as I zoom in and out, you can see they're all over the country. Obviously, we've got tens of thousands of campgrounds, RV parks, resorts, state parks, national parks, all that. So as I zoom in on where I want to find a campground, looks good, looks good. I've still got plenty. And then all of a sudden, they're gone. I mean, they are gone. If I zoom around here, there isn't a single campground in sight. So something's wrong, right? One thing we want to check is here in the upper right-hand corner, we can see that, I'm just checking on that. Yeah. Upper right-hand corner, we can see that my campgrounds are in fact turned on or visible. If I click on that little campground tent right there, you see it kind of gives it's a little eyeball with a slash through it, as in no smoking or no viewing, right? So I've turned that off. So if I click that, my campgrounds should be showing up. What else could be going on? Well, let's look at our friend filters. We see I have 2 filters engaged. So before we go any farther, let's just kind of refresh that. If you zoom in and the campgrounds all disappear, it's probably a filtering issue, assuming your campgrounds are turned on. So I got a filtering issue. Let's see what that might be. So I'm going to pop open my research tab, and I'm going to see down here at the bottom that I have state parks, forests, and preserves selected, and KOA selected. And so this is where we've got a problem, and we're going to slow this down. We're going to talk specifically about park types, and we're going to find that points of interest, or POIs, also have a type. Whereas down here under brands and membership, I've chosen KOA. Essentially, and we've covered this before, but it always bears covering again, and particularly today, we're going over filters in general. I've essentially told TripWizard, show me all the park types of state parks, state parks, forests, and preserves that are KOAs. And of course, we're not ever going to find that. It doesn't exist. So I can see that if I remove this KOA from here, suddenly the state parks, forests, and preserves show up, and you can see all these brown icons here. So well, let's break this down a little bit and talk about filter stacking and things of that nature. So let's talk about what a park type is first. And I'll back that out by saying, what type of park is a KOA? Well, a KOA is a commercial or private park, right? It's either privately or commercially owned. And if we look at our types up here near the top, a KOA is not a state park or a forest. It's not a national park. It's not a Canadian park. It's not BLM land. It's not a city park. It's not a forest reserve. It's not a military fan camp. It's not a Corps of Engineers park. You get the idea. This section up here is all about park types. So in this scenario, if I wanted to say, look, I don't care about state parks to this trip. I want to find commercial and private parks. I could click commercial and private parks. And in here, I'm actually telling Trip Wizard, hey, look, I'm okay with commercial and private parks, and go ahead and show me state parks as well. All right. If I unclick that, the state parks disappear. If I reselect it, they show back up. We're giving you a lot of granularity here so you can really fine tune what you're looking for. So let's say in this case, I don't care about the state parks. I only want commercial and private. Now I'm going to see all commercial and private parks. I'm not going to see state parks, national parks, that sort of thing. And sure enough, if I troll around here enough, I'll find, here we go, down here is a KOA. Well, what if I want to, I want more granularity than that, and I just want to see KOAs. Now I could come down here to the brands and choose KOA. And there they are. That's all I'm seeing now. Now, so the question bears asking, do I even need to select this park type at all? And if I deselect that park type and leave KOAs, you can find that the answer is no. It reminds me as an ex-IT guy of Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel, where there's 10 different ways to do the same thing. If you want to copy something, you can right click and choose copy. You can hit Control C or Command C, or you can go to a menu and choose edit copy. And that's only 3 or 4 ways, right? There's always ways to do, multiple ways to do many things. And what we're giving you here is multiple ways to do many things. The danger becomes is when you mix and match. And so the rule of thumb is fairly simple. If you're choosing park types, and so perhaps in this case, I only want to see state parks and national parks and forest. Anyway, that's it. And you can see that's all I'm getting. I can either choose a park type, or I can go down and I can basically nitpick through everything else with regard to the commercial and private and all that sort of thing. I certainly find myself more often than not filtering by type at all. And you can see I have no filters selected. Look up here at the top where it says filters. I have 0 filters selected. And so what I'm saying is, look, I don't care where it is. I'm interested in it. Okay, I don't want to be limited. But then I can say in the other breath, well, hold on, because it's going to be the middle of summer perhaps, and I need to be able to run all my air conditioners and power and everything else I need. So I'm going to need 50 amp, right? So if I come here to my hookups and connectivity, I might decide, 50 amp is kind of my baseline. I have to have that. So I click on 50 amp and look how many things just dropped away, right? Let's look at that again. And of course, what we lost were a lot of the state parks or national parks or things that have only 30 amp access or no access or no electricity or whatever. So, we've seen the same scenario play out as well, where I didn't, somebody says, well, let me clear my filters again. Somebody says, well, go ahead and show me all the state parks, and I got to have 50 amp and Wi-Fi. And now we're back to nothing again, except down here, 2 little state parks in the Denver area actually offer 50 amp and Wi-Fi. So here again, this is a case where we're stacking types with other items. And it's just, be aware of how that works. When in doubt, turn off your filters. You can either individually turn them off down here, or you can come up to the top and just choose the one button that briefly turns off all filters. A great use case for this button might be, let's say you've really dialed this in. We didn't pick a type, but we did say, okay, and in this case, I've got to have 50 amp, I've got to have Wi-Fi, I've got to have sewer, I've got to have laundry, whatever. I mean, just whatever your case is. So now I've got 4 different criteria selected. Let's add one more. Let's add pets to that. So now I've got 5 filters selected, and you can see that, you know, my limits, there's not too many limitations, but there are some. Now, the more remote you get, the more those limits come into play. So if I come into here and say, well, I really needed to stay around Fort Morgan somewhere, and there's nothing there, we could say, all right, let's turn our filters off. Now there's some items there. Let's figure out what we might be sacrificing to stay here if I really must stay here. And if I click on this Silver Spur campground, I see I see what I'm sacrificing is that Wi-Fi. You can tell by these little icons here. That was what I was sacrificing by selecting that. And so I have to decide, look, do I really need Wi-Fi, or is my cell signal good, close enough to Denver that I can leech off of that for a hotspot, whatever. Again, it's all about making decisions. But what I didn't have to do was go in there one at a time, turn on a filter, turn off a filter, turn on a filter, turn off a filter. I just went up to the top and hit filters. And of course, if I go back and hit them, there they are again. So let's say I've cleared my filters and I'm only interested again in seeing these state parks. Okay, so if I were to zoom out, I'm seeing only these state parks. And if I look at, I'm going to turn off campgrounds for just a minute. Let's remember that in this entire trip, I have other park types shown: KOA, FMCA, Passport America. So even though I'm filtering only on state parks, let's zoom in here a little bit. If I can find a state park in this area, I'm still going to see this type of campground that I have on my map. In other words, I've already selected this and added it to my trip. You can see as I highlight Lena KOA here on the left, it bobs up and down on my map. So don't let that confuse you and you think, hey, wait a minute, I only selected state parks. Why am I seeing a KOA? It's because you've already selected it on your map. So that's come up a few times. I wanted to touch on that. So one of the questions we frequently get asked is when we saw our example of a state park with a KOA, right? So we're not going to get any parks here. But yet, oh, there's all kinds of them. They're all over the country, state parks that are KOAs, right? Well, we look at that and we're like, well, every time I zoom in, they disappear. Well, we sort of explained why that happens, but why is it? It's because at this level, at this 30 or 50,000 foot view, we don't want to try to run the calculations for every square mile that's in our visible site here, or again, it would just bog down your system. It would be a CPU cycle nightmare trying to calculate that up at that level. As soon as we get a little bit closer, and one more, now we're dealing with a patch of land essentially that we can process and say, okay, show me all the KOAs that are state parks in this area. And of course, there are none, so we see none. But that's one reason why we can't see them all at this 30,000 foot view. Filtering is great. Let's talk about park ratings. This one really gets folks because, let's see, right now I have no filters engaged. I'm only going to go park rating. And of course, I want at least 4 stars, right? So I'm going to click, whoops, I'm not zoomed in close enough. We're going to zoom in, pick 4 stars. And now we're going to zoom out. And we're back in this Denver area. And looks like my selection is not particularly broad here. You know, my first inclination is, well, there sure aren't many campgrounds here in the Denver area. But if I were to turn off that filter real quick, look how many show up. And that's just simply because 4 stars is a pretty highly ranked campground. There are just not that many. Be careful with your ratings. Perhaps start with a 3 and then add some other criteria. Let's talk about big rigs and pull-throughs. So this is a tricky one for folks. This is going to be, amenities. So I drive a 43 footer, so that's a big rig. Um, Often my inclination is to just pick big rig access or pick pull through sites or pick both. And the thing you've got to be careful with here, and you can see there's a disparity in these numbers. I mean, how can there be what amounts to here 16 campgrounds in my visible range that have pull throughs, or excuse me, that say they're big rig access, but they don't have pull throughs? It doesn't make a lot of sense, and that's because some parks only have back in sites, but they're big. I think particularly of, it's not in this visual here, but it was Pagosa Springs, Wolf Creek Lodge, I think is what it was called. Just lovely, wonderful campground, 9 out of 10 or something like that. But they're only back in sites. They back into these gorgeous sites with scenery and gazebos and all kinds of stuff, but there's no pull throughs at all. So just be careful when you're looking for amenities. Decide what's exactly important to you. If your goal is to have big rig access and stay somewhere for a week that's really nice, you might not want to display pull-throughs, particularly when you see the disparity here. Here in this view, there's 18 sites have pull-through versus 40 that are big rig. So just bear that in mind. If you're looking for one night stops to get you going on your road, pull through is what you want to have selected. If you're looking for a great campground somewhere you want to stay a week, just be cognizant of that particular feature there.